that time again. Every 5 years, the Farm Bill comes up before Congress, and there's always a fight and debates, and we have farmers and families just sitting there biting their nails, waiting to see what comes out of it. But the fact is that the Farm Bill affects a lot more than just farmers. Joining me via Zoom today is Carolina Schneider. She is a registered dietitian, and we're going to talk about the Farm Bill, SNAP benefits, and building stronger, healthier families. Carolina, thank you very much for joining me on Community Spotlight today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, with agriculture being such a big industry, especially in our part of the Commonwealth here, we have a lot of people who rely on the Farm Bill reauthorization each time, but it goes quite beyond that. It's very vital to our family's nutrition, isn't it?
Absolutely, Andy, and I'm glad you brought this up because I feel like if people are not familiar with the Farm Bill, they're not aware of how many people are impacted by that. So the Farm Bill can really promote or hinder the development of our local and regional food system. So the Farm Bill supports different initiatives that can increase access to fresh and locally sourced foods for families and children, and can therefore, as a consequence, contribute to whether or not we have access to healthier diets and overall health, let's say, and disease prevention, and also plays a role, of course, on local economies. So it's very important.
Now, I mentioned SNAP, which, especially in an economically depressed area like ours, is very important. SNAP, for those who are unaware, is the program that grew out of the old food stamp program, and it's quite expansive, and the Farm Bill has a lot of influence on it. How does SNAP affect the way that our families make their nutrition choices?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's what some people may know as food stamps, but SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and it's one of the nutrition programs that the Farm Bill includes the provisions for and supports, and that's why that's the relationship between the Farm Bill and SNAP. But SNAP really helps millions of individuals and families, including children, have access to food. So essentially, any changes in the funding or the eligibility criteria or even the structure of the programs, which is determined, by the Farm Bills, can have a severe implication on whether or not these families and children have access to food in the first place, and especially healthy, nutritious food. So it really impacts the food security and therefore the well-being of these populations. And in fact, there are about 70% of the SNAP beneficiaries are in families with children. So it really should be a top priority, for us as citizens and Congress to prioritize this program and what it includes to make sure that these families and children are having access. And there's the SNAP actually helps roughly 40 million Americans put food on the table each month.
I also want to just add in here that SNAP is one of those few programs that actually pays back to the federal government, because for every dollar that is spent for SNAP, it produces about $2 in economic activity.
Right. So it's got that yo-yo effect, and it people who are not familiar with it, obviously it's okay. They might not understand the impacts. But from a nutrition perspective, I love that SNAP permits, the purchase of very nutritious foods such as fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins. But what I think what's lacking is more explicit guidelines when it comes to not only, the quality of the foods that are allowed in that program, but also the nutritional value of these items and supplements, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think there's a few things that we could make it better.
What are some of the nutrition gaps that exist with SNAP as it's currently structured?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it does give access to wholesome, nutritious foods, which is great. But I wanted to specifically talk about today with you, Andy, is the vitamin D supplementation. So, I think there's two simple revisions that could improve the SNAP program for these families. So adding vitamin D supplementation is extremely crucial in my professional opinion, and I can talk more about that and why that is. But I also think that in terms of nutrition, I think SNAP could encourage their beneficiaries to shop at independent grocery stores and natural product stores because they may not be aware that they already have access to this. So a lot of these health stores, what we call natural product stores, they accept SNAPs and they do offer usually more nutritious, wholesome, local produce that people could benefit from. And sometimes they just don't know they have access to those stores. So I wanted to bring that up to the attention today. But the vitamin D would be the one that I believe it's lacking from a nutrition perspective.
Isn't vitamin D just created from sunshine? That's what my parents told me.
They were not lying to you.
I think it was just an excuse to get me out of the house, but still.
Yes. So essentially your body produces vitamin D when you are in contact with sunlight, which is great. But let's be honest, nowadays we are told to avoid too much sun exposure. And we're always wearing sunscreen, which is a good thing. Listen to your dermatologist. But with that comes also, our inability to produce enough vitamin D. We're just not as exposed to sunlight. And then think about the people who live in certain geographic locations where they are not exposed to sunlight, or, they have long winters without sunlight. So there's other different conditions, health-wise that could prevent you from absorbing or producing vitamin D effectively. People of color have a different mechanism for producing vitamin D. So they are in higher risk for vitamin D deficiency. So although, yes, you can get it from sunlight, realistically, we don't get enough of it through sunlight because we are now told to avoid too much sun exposure. It's a little hard.
Yeah.
Exactly. As we know, or your listeners may not know, vitamin D deficiency is a real thing. Most of us are vitamin D deficient, and that goes back to what we were talking about with sunlight. But also, there are food products, of course, that are a good source of vitamin D, such as fish and egg yolks and fortified dairy products. But think about all the people who have some dietary restriction or are not consuming these foods on a regular basis, or are just not consuming enough nutrition, right? Think about a lot of our population, and they're not getting the nutrients they need from food because they're just not eating a nutritious diet for whatever reason that be. It's usually a lack of access.
So while we're waiting for Congress to make changes to the Farm Bill, what can SNAP recipients do right now to help make healthier choices?
Yes. So I have a very easy recommendation for that. So one thing for all of us listening, before I talk about the SNAP beneficiaries, you can easily ask your elected officials of Congress to add vitamin D3 to the Farm Bill. There is an organization, it's called Organic and Natural Health Association. And what they did is they essentially wrote the letter for you. So all you have to do is, plug in your address and your name, and you go to this website. It's allforvitamind.com. allforvitamind.com, and you click on the tab that says take action, and essentially you just fill your information and it sends the letter to your to the Congress, depending on where you live. So that's one thing that everyone can do today if you want to help us help others in terms of nutrition. But then SNAP beneficiaries, knowing that you have access to these natural product stores and independent grocery stores, I think that's one great step to have more access to nutritious foods. And also, I feel like at these stores, even the workers, they are more health aware and conscious. So it's easier to make better decisions when you're shopping at those stores. You're usually supporting local farmers, which is, extremely important to have that more local food system. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing you can do. So you can advocate for the D3 vitamin on the website, allforvitamind.com. And if you are a SNAP beneficiary yourself, looking for these more nutrient-dense foods in these independent grocery stores and natural product stores is a great step towards, improving your health and your nutrition.
And thank you for saving me from having to ask you how people could lobby Congress for this, because it is something that definitely needs to be considered in the Farm Bill. How can our audience find out more about you and all the stuff that we discussed today?
Yeah, so you can find more about the website. I said All for Vitamin D has all the information on what we discussed, and you can find me on Instagram. I'm Carolina the Green RD, and RD as in registered dietitian. And you can also find me on my website, hungryforplants.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Carolina Schneider, registered
Yes.
dietitian, thank you very much for joining me on Community Spotlight this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.